Nico Rosberg fan and aspiring motorsport journalist, and someone was like, Katie, there's going to come a point where you're going to have to take a Nico Rosberg fan out of your bio. A big step, but the right step. And then he retired anyway, so it didn't really matter. But
that's why he retired, Katie.
Yeah, he was
his biggest fan.
Katie's
It was
support's gone.
No, we both thought Ocon was going to outperform Fernando in 2021, which was an opinion that didn't get us a lot of love and didn't come true.
Especially as well with Jess being there before. Although Jess and I have completely different job roles, I was really concerned that a lot of people were just going to see me as, oh, well, Jess is gone, so they're just going to draft in another woman to take her place on the podcast.
Welcome back to the Cool Down Podcast. My name's Tomo. Thank you for listening, joining wherever you are in the world, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. Don't forget, like and subscribe, 5 stars, all that good stuff. We've got another banger of a guest today. I promise you this, it's been a while in the making, but I've wanted to get her on for a long time. Today's guest is WTF1's editor, Katy Fairman. Editor is in writing, not making the videos. There should be another term to separate video editor and website editor. But yeah, you'll have probably seen Katy on the WTF1 podcast. She writes for WTF1. Her career arc is super interesting, super different, super out the box. If you want to get into F1 journalism or editorial work or whatever, I'd really recommend you listen to this one till the very end. So the Cool Down Podcast, number 25, Katy Fairman. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for giving me your very, very valuable time. First and foremost, how are you? Get the pleasantries out the way first of all.
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, new year, not really new me, but new regulations and all sorts of stuff to look forward to in F1. So yeah, hopefully 2022 is going to be as exciting as 2021, but there's a lot to live up to, so who knows?
New year, new regulation. And you've just come off what? How long have you been at WTF1 for now? Because I remember when you joined, was that just over a year or about a year?
So I joined in October 2020. So I've been there just over a year and a bit. And it's gone so quick. It's mad.
Yeah, I was going to say, I still remember when when I was editing for WTF1, you just joined towards the end. So there was a brief overlap when we worked together very briefly before I left at the end of that year. But I guess, how have you found it? Because from where you were working before, and to everyone who doesn't know, maybe elaborate on where you worked before you joined WTF1. But how has that transition been? Because obviously WTF1's platform is huge. Like, you're almost at 1 million subscribers now, which I think gives me hope that maybe I can get there one day, because there's clearly the appetite for it amongst the YouTube F1 audience.
Yeah, so before I joined WTF1 full time, I was doing my normal motorsport journalism. So I was covering Formula E and doing some other bits. But that was kind of a passion project on the side. So my normal job, I guess, 9 to 5, I was working as a marketing assistant for a kitchen and garden company, very glamorous. But like all my jobs that I've done up until this one, none of them have been full-time motorsport. Like I did reception in front of house for hairdressers, worked in a fabric shop, all this kind of stuff, and then had F1 as my side hobby. But yeah, now I'm doing it full-time. It has been quite difficult to like switch off, because this has been my hobby for like my whole life. Yeah. So now I'm doing it full time and I just want to spend all my time on it. And I've begun to realize, like, I literally have no interest outside motorsport. This is really tragic. I need to do some more things, because otherwise it's just going to be F1 all day, every day.
I feel that, because again, for me, like, YouTube and making videos was my hobby. That was my thing I did like outside of work. So now it's work. I literally feel you exactly the same, mate, because I'm the same. Like, I still love it as much as I ever did as a hobby, but I also do it day to day at work. But that's interesting, because like, obviously your route to where you are now, would you say it wasn't a traditional route to get into this kind of F1, like, I guess, journalism, like, perspective? Because would you call yourself a journalist?
I wouldn't call myself a journalist at this moment in time. I think, like, I would like to do more things of being in the paddock and stuff like that, because at the moment I am majority based at home, whereas before, when I was covering Formula E, I was able to get in the paddock, get those stories, and that's, I would say, at that side of thing, I was definitely doing, what a journalist does. Whereas I'm at home now and I'm still trying to, scout stories here and there, but it's never going to be the same as being there, speaking to a driver, trying to get that story, that scoop. But I guess, there's still a part of me that wants to be like that journalist, but at the moment with the reality of COVID and everything, it's just not quite possible. So I guess more of just like, my official title at WTF1 is website editor. But like editor writer, I guess, is my current job role.
Yeah, because like the traditional term of journalist has quite, when you hear the word journalist, you think of certain things. But obviously working on a platform like WTF1, where it is so kind of fan oriented and so connected to the fan base, like I feel like these roles and even a word like editor, again, traditionally would have meant certain things, but working with a team like WTF1, where it is, it's small, it's very connected to the fan base, it's kind of very fan-led compared to your more traditional kind of autosports and, motorsport.com and all that. It's kind of, you operate in your own kind of separate entity, which covers a certain subset of F1 fans. How close is the way you speak about F1 when you were doing it as a hobby to how you speak about it at WTF1? Do you feel that's pretty much the same, or have you had to slightly change your style, do you think?
I think I've definitely had to change my style a bit. I mean, before I joined WTF1, going way back when I was like a proper hardcore fan, like just starting with my idea of wanting to get into motorsport journalism, I was a big Nico Rosberg fan, and one of very few in the UK, especially when he was against Hamilton. It was not a popular choice. But yeah, I was such a hardcore Nico fan, like, I hate to admit this, but created like a fan page on Facebook, like Nico Rosberg fans and all this kind of stuff. Nice. And I had it in my Twitter bio. I think the first thing was like Nico Rosberg fan and aspiring motorsport journalist. And someone was like, Katie, there's going to come a point where you're going to have to take a Nico Rosberg fan out of your bio. And I was like, oh, I know, but it's like such a huge part of why I loved F1 Twitter at the time. And taking that out of the bio was a big step, but the right step. And then he retired anyway, so it didn't really matter. But
that's why he retired, Katie.
Yeah, he was
his
like,
biggest fan. It was like,
support's gone.
No, it's over.
Oh no, sorry, Nico, my bad. But it's been a bit of a weird one because in Formula E, like, I'm so impartial with all of that. And then coming into WTF1 and it's like encourage, Matt supports Charles and Tommy loves Max. And I think I'm like you in that sense that I like so many of the drivers on the grid and I don't really have a favourite driver. I just like to see, I'm a big fan of the underdog doing well. So like Ocon in Hungary, that was mega emotion. I mean, that was amazing. But yeah, I suppose compared to how, people at the race, Scott Mitchell, for example, or Luke Smith at Autosport, they've got to be quite reserved with their opinions. Obviously, they can say if they think something's right or if they're wrong, but they can't be saying, oh, well, I love Fernando Alonso so much. So, this does like, it's not really an angle they can take. But with WTF1, because it is so fan-led and it's like a community we've got there, I think our audience enjoy it, that they can see that we are just fans at the heart of it. Because sometimes with journalistic, they can seem quite distant to it all. So, yeah, lots of positives to be had with the way WTF1 operates.
Yeah, my kind of perspective on what you and Tommy and Matt do is that you do kind of sit in that middle area between exactly what you say about kind of Scott and Luke and Chris Medland and these guys who kind of, if they were to divulge their drivers that they like more than others, that would be held against them. And I think where, the perspective I come from, because I'm not, as much as I love Alex Albon, I'm not an Alex Albon fan channel. I will, there were plenty of times in 2020 where I had to, I had to be critical because, performances weren't there. But I think as well, that's kind of, I think that's very honest. I think most fans feel like, you have preferences. Vast majority, you're going to have a favourite team or favourite driver, and that's like completely fine. But you can also speak on the sport in as objective a way as possible, and we're all guilty of it. I'm sure I give Alex more benefit of the doubt than maybe he deserves at times. Maybe or maybe not. That's why I think WTF1's done so well, is that you've kind of nailed that in-between point where fans, I think, are still looking for, well-educated opinions and, you work full-time and you understand the sport more than most people, but also, you're very real with your takes and very real with your perception, and, you also just genuine with the way you come across. And I think that's why it's worked so well.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think people think I'm genuine. I mean, I was saying to you before this podcast started, sometimes I've not quite mastered the art yet of thinking of things before I say them out loud, which can sometimes be fun on the podcast when we're making, or I'm making terrible bets. All my dignity's sort of gone out the window after the first podcast I did with WTF1. But at the same time, yeah, I'm just a bit real and yeah.
Look, that's it. No, that is, and that's the thing. It's kind of, you're right. Like when you realize the scope of, because when I started making videos, you know, it kind of grew gradually, and I became increasingly aware of the scale of people that I was speaking to. But for you kind of jumped into WTF1 already like a 500,000 subscriber channel. Like, how has that been for you? And just going from, you know, a fan talking about the sport with, you know, compared to your platform now, relatively small, to now all of a sudden there's loads of eyeballs. Like, there's a lot of pressures that come with that obviously I feel as well, but you jumping straight into it, that must have been quite a big, you know, challenge.
It was certainly a big jump. I mean, I'm not a person that really like goes off of numbers of followers and things like that. But before I started WTF1 on Twitter, I think I had maybe like 3,000 followers, which is still, you know, like I was still happy with that amount with what I was doing. And now I think I'm on like 23,000 or 24,000 or something like that, which is a big jump. And like you say, with WTF1, there were a few people who, you know, was aware of what I was doing before then, but it's definitely put me in front of, well, like you said, like we're close to 1 million subscribers, like so many more people. And yeah, that's been brilliant because luckily the WTF1 fans that we've got, you know, they're also supportive and they've been so welcoming. And that's something that I really do appreciate hugely, because people, especially as well with Jess being there before, although Jess and I have completely different job roles, I was really concerned that a lot of people were just going to see me as, oh, well, Jess is gone, so they're just going to draft in another woman to take her place on the podcast, which I don't know if maybe I'm a huge overthinker anyway, and I suffer massively with imposter syndrome some of the time. So I don't know if maybe that was just me coming up with all these scenarios in my head. But yeah, people have been so lovely and seem to have liked my addition to the team, which is all I can really have asked for. But yeah, it is weird. Like, I think Tommy was saying something the other day, because when we record our podcast, it's normally just on Zoom and it's the three of us chatting, and it's like being at the pub with mates and having a convo. And then he said like, oh, well, enough people listened to the last week's podcast that could fill Wembley Stadium. And you're like, oh my goodness. And I said all of that stuff and all those people are going to be listening to it. But you can't really have that mindset when you're recording it, because otherwise I will just say like 3 words the whole podcast, and that's not my style.
Absolutely, because that is the broadcasting and the nature of, you know, whether you've got a channel with 10 subscribers or 1 million, like the actual interaction when you sit down at a desk and speak to a camera, like, doesn't change for me as I've gone through. Because I remember the first time I'd get stick, and it would, you know, you'd feel it and you'd be like, oh God. Yeah. And then that imposter syndrome creeping. But obviously, you know, you've got I think for me, it's a degree of like acceptance that, you know, the bigger your platform gets, these voices are going to be there. But also like that's my kind of like resolution, for want of a better term, for 2022, is to focus more, because the positive comments, just like, it's a 98% positive. Yeah. Like, it's a massive skew in that favour. And ultimately there's going to be, you know, there's always going to be that small subset. The proof's in the pudding. I mean, the channel as well, like, since you joined, and obviously you're a big component of how the channel's almost like, I remember when I finished at the end of 2020, the channel was at about 560, 600, something like that, I think it was. And now you're almost knocking on 900. Like, it's been amazing. I'm
going to clip that and send that to Matt and say I'm the sole reason the channel has grown. Tomo said so.
Go for it. Yeah, Matt doesn't know anything, all right? It's all the Katy and Tommy machine. Clip that and all. That's going to be,
that's going to be clipped now. Thanks. But yeah, no, it has gone from strength to strength, which is really cool. And website too. Like, we had somebody who used to do the editorial and stuff before I joined. But like, I mean, I get really awkward talking about like the kind of work I've done. But the website as well has just gone from strength to strength and like doubling, tripling year on year, which is really cool. And obviously means I'm doing an okay job. So I'll take that. But the growth of WTF1 just in general has been phenomenal. So it's very, very cool to be a part of that.
Because there's so much focus on kind of Instagram and Twitter and the more conventional socials, but also like an actual traditional website, that is still a super important part of the machine, right?
Yeah, oh, hugely. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, there is still people who would love it if we could just do everything as a social post and you don't have to click through to websites and stuff like that. And there are smaller F1 accounts that do exactly that. You know, they say everything that you need to know in a graphic on Instagram. And that's great if you can afford to do that. But yeah, like you say, websites are still such a huge important part of Formula One. And even if it's just reporting on news stories or sharing features and opinions, I know there are other platforms like, you know, things on YouTube that you do, for example, where you can talk about certain topics. But yeah, I think having things written down, sometimes I find, and this is one of the reasons why I love my job and I really got into writing, especially about F1, is that if there's a topic of conversation, for example, Daniel Abt, when he got sacked by Audi for this whole esports thing, I had some quite strong takes on it. So I put it down on paper and shared it out, and plenty of people engaged with it and said, you know what, Katie, you've actually hit the nail on the head, bang on exactly how I felt about the thing. And of course, you're going to get people that disagree and go, no, actually, I'm the opposite. But, you know, I encourage that as long as you're not vicious and you're not, you know, being horrible and picking apart unnecessary things. Like, I love it when I send an opinionated piece out and people have an opposite opinion, because I think, well, that's what makes life so interesting. You know, we can't all agree on everything. But yeah, it's when people from these Twitter accounts that don't have their face as a profile picture and, you know, exactly the kind that I mean, where they're just out looking for trouble and stuff. That's when a line is crossed. But yeah, like I'm not asking everyone on this listening to the podcast to go and leave me like opposite opinions of everything I've ever tweeted. But, you know, a bit of variety and differing opinion, I think, is a healthy thing to encourage.
No, like I've said this a few times, like on my channel as well. Like, if you agree with every single thing I say, that's not right. Like, you shouldn't agree with every single. It's like people who affiliate with a certain political party and then they just blindly follow and believe every single thing that they say and endorse everything. It's like, no, that's not normal. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be like, you know, there's going to be certain people that you agree with more things than others, but like, take every take for what it's worth. And obviously for you, having this first kind of full-time opportunity, being one where you can, you know, you don't have to be a traditional journalist in the sense that you have to keep your personal kind of opinions and unconscious biases to yourself. How does that make you feel, like, about, say there was, you know, say WTF1 for some reason just fell off the planet tomorrow and you had to go down and you got an opportunity to be the more traditional journalist where you couldn't speak your mind as much. Has this experience at WTF1 kind of changed your perspective of that? And do you feel like now that you've had this opportunity to both speak on the sport but also speak your mind, do you think you would struggle to let that go?
That's a good question, because like with my blog that I had beforehand, you know, that was my platform and I was very used to putting my opinions out there on my website. And so it was evident, you know, this is what I think. But it's a difficult one, because I think I could easily make that transition, because as a journalist, you've got to have that versatility to be able to, you know, whether it's a style guide, if you're, you know, WTF1's got a much more casual, fun, relaxed feel to it. Whereas if I was to switch to somewhere like the BBC, that's very formal and quite dry in the way that they write things, but it is there to serve a purpose, which is to educate and inform people. It's not there to crack jokes and be, you know, all kind of humorous with it. So I think I could make the switch. That wouldn't be an issue. But yeah, I suppose when I'm doing the podcast and stuff like that, you know, people might come back and a few months' time and be like, well, in this piece you said this, but on this podcast you actually said that you were against it and all this kind of stuff. So I'm aware that some things I say on the WTF1 podcast might come back to bite me, but
that's the problem. This is why it's kind of online. A lot of it is kind of a no-win situation, because what is actually very real, and I think, we both thought Ocon was going to outperform Fernando in 2021, which was an opinion that didn't get us a lot of love and didn't come true.
Spain was after us.
Exactly. El Plan was a bigger plan than we thought it would be. He did a cracking job. I think our rationale from both our point of view was very similar. Like, you look at Michael Schumacher, when he returned, he wasn't the driver he used to be. Fernando being as old as he is, blah blah blah, all this stuff. But at the end of the day, like, what is actually real? And again, my opinion of Fernando Alonso wasn't very positive from a behind the scenes point of view beforehand. I feel like he'd kind of been too critical with his teams, like internally, and caused problems, which had led him to only winning 2 world titles. When actually, I think he's, in terms of driver quality, for me, he's up there in the best of all time. He's up in that conversation, no question. They're two kind of separate things. But again, it's like you will say one thing, and then he has this amazing 2021 season. For me, he was one I really enjoyed Fernando Alonso for the first time, really, ever. Like, he was like having a pop at the FIA. For me, it was like he was having a pop more at external factors, but you could tell he was really invested in that Enstone team. And so I've got a way more positive of Fernando Alonso right now. That doesn't change like the fact that I didn't like what he did in the past, but right now I really like Fernando, and I feel like we've kind of gone through the same kind of character arc with our perception of Fernando over this last kind of year and a bit, haven't we?
Oh, 100%. Like, listening back to we revisited our 2021 predictions, and I was saying about Fernando, and exactly the same reasons as you, when he had the whole McLaren Honda and referring it to a GP2 engine, and he just became, from what I'd heard in the paddock and just reviewing it from an external point of view, quite bitter, quite very sour about the whole thing, and the way that he'd conducted himself in his F1 career throughout the years didn't give him a glowing reputation. So when he came back, I had the same opinion. I was like, he left not on the best note, but he's gone and done other things now, and maybe it's best that he kind of leaves that F1 thing alone, and just accept the way that it kind of came to an end. And then, 2021, it's like Fernando Alonso managed to clone himself in that break, and he came back and he was so funny, and his driving was brilliant. I mean, some of his team radios in 2021 were just some of the best team radios I've ever heard. Like, his sarcastic comments after pulling these outrageous moves, breaking track limit rules, all this kind of stuff. I ended 2021 being like, I never thought in my 26 years that I would be this much of a Fernando Alonso supporter. But here we are. Like, he's turned it around, and whether he will change characteristics if he gets a competitive car underneath him next year, who knows? But yeah, it doesn't mean that, like you say, what I said at the beginning of 2022 is not how I felt at the time. And that's something I feel people on social media are so quick to drag up on things of saying like, oh, well, you were very critical of him at the start. And every time I gave him praise on the podcast last year, I had to say, I know that I was critical of him at the start, but, he's changed my opinion. Because you just know that all the comments are going to be like, people like, oh, Katy, like 1 minute when it's convenient for her, she's slating him. And now she wants to piggyback off his success. It's
the irony is that people will call that fake, but actually that's more real than anything. That you don't, when you get an opinion, like the first time you meet a person in real life, like you might get a really negative first impression of someone, get to know them, and they'll be your best mate. And it's like, that's real. What would be fake is that I would be like, no, Fernando, no, it's all fake. He's actually really toxic still, blah, blah, blah. That would be fake. That's the irony of the situation. Like, actually, what is real is the fact that your opinions do change over time, and you see different sides of people. Because also F1 drivers, you've got to remember as well, like for only until like this new Liberty Media era and the Netflix behind the scenes and the teams developing their own content in-house as well, we've never really got to see these drivers really. Like we've only like throughout most of Fernando's career, for most of Lewis's career, like we never really got that as a collective. We never really got that insight behind the scenes of what these drivers were actually like. And I think that's a big kind of component factor as well for me.
Oh, hugely. I think, yes, there are negatives that maybe the Drive to Survive have brought to Formula One, but it's also brought a huge amount of positive. And like you say, leading with the personalities side of things. I mean, look at Daniel Ricciardo. Obviously, as F1 fans, we all knew he was a very cheeky chappy. He was a fun guy. He could have a laugh. But Drive to Survive completely opened up a new door for him, and he was really able to show what he was like, not just goofing around on the podium, nicking Mercedes' phone or whatever and doing these funny Instagram stories. He's like that seems almost 24/7, unless he has a bad result and then he goes full on rage, which is a very different side to him. But it's good to have the
scream in the helmet is
covered.
One of my just most iconic. That's so good.
Yeah.
Like the scream is just too much. But that's the beauty with F1, because you've got so many different, like Kimi and Daniel could not be more two polar opposite characters, yet they do the same job and they do it to a very similar level. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, exactly. No, it's true. I'm glad we're seeing more of these personalities, because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get into journalism and motorsport, is because I knew that there were so many amazing stories that could be told within Formula One, whether that's, a driver, a mechanic who maybe went through an interesting route, or somebody in PR or whatever it might be. There are so many incredible stories to be told there. And I love nothing more than sitting down with someone and just kind of like this, having a conversation, listening to how they got to where they are. Everyone in their career has got highs, they've got lows, and it's how you sort of deal with both of those that can kind of shape you into the person that you are. And that's one thing I'm really missing with COVID, and, not being able to be in the paddock and have those conversations with people. But hopefully the time will come soon.
Fingers crossed very soon. Well, yeah, and you make a good point, because when you talk about stories of these drivers, I think for all of us, I've benefited massively, secondhand from Drive to Survive. WTF1 as a platform has benefited massive, because it's put F1 into this kind of mainstream, funnel, and then people will go looking for more. They'll find WTF1, they'll find my channel, they'll find lots of other, whether it's The Race, whether it's Autosport, whether it's other independent creators as well. But what do you think Drive to Survive's success has asserted in your mind about the power of Formula One and the storytelling? Because it hasn't covered, and I know it gets critiqued for this, it hasn't covered the sport in a race by race, super true to the facts manner. Yet it's been so successful. It's been, you look at the audiences at COTA this year, was it 4 times the number of people went than they did in 2019? The effect has been insane.
Yeah, I mean, there are, like I said, plenty of good things about Drive to Survive, that we get to see behind the scenes of areas that we wouldn't necessarily get access to. But also, creating these fake rivalries. I was lucky enough to be able to see season 3 before it got released to the public. And as soon as I saw the Carlos and Lando storyline, I was like, well, people aren't going to be happy with that. And then the one that really, I think, they crossed a line with, and it doesn't seem to be that much of a popular take. I don't know if maybe I'm just extra fragile or something, but the Roman Grosjean episode, The Man on Fire, I think that could have been handled a lot better. And I think that's a perfect example of them. I guess, you got to utilize what you have and create that fear and that anxiety that we all had when we saw it live. I mean, Christ, I still get flashbacks to seeing, his car on fire. I had a dream. I mean, I would have vivid dreams as it is, but I had a dream a few weeks ago where there was an F1 race and a car crash and there was a fireball. And I'm like, crikey, I'm still thinking, my brain still got it as a reference all this time later. But yeah, I think that was a good example of them just really stretching the truth to a point where, for me, it wasn't. I know it's like a documentary series, but it was just not done right. I mean, the out of context team radio they used of Grosjean before he hit the wall. Like, obviously we all know that's not what happened, and I can see why they've done it, to make it as dramatic as possible. And they must know that a huge amount of people that watch Drive to Survive are brand new to it, and they've got to manufacture, like I said, that stress and that fear of knowing if he's going to be all right. But I think when I watched that back, it took like 15 minutes for them to actually confirm that he was okay and that he was not seriously injured or would have life-changing injuries. I know he's got all the damage to his hand and such, but that really, I wasn't happy with how that was handled.
I feel like that the incident itself didn't need any additional kind of fluff to make it more like you say, building that tension, because it was front page news like all over the world, because it was so dramatic, and we haven't seen that so long in the sport, and we have kind of become numb to the reality of how dangerous F1 can be, and we haven't since Gilles Bianchi's kind of that freak accident in Suzuka, like in terms of kind of an on track incident under like normal circumstances, we haven't seen one that big for a long time, maybe since like, I don't know, Fernando's massive shove.
I was thinking about Fernando,
was that Australia? Melbourne,
when it came to where the Gutierrez,
and that's one. But when there's that additional element of fire, that adds kind of so much to it, and it's like, because I feel like there is this disconnect as well between like, and I think that's why Max has said he won't be a part of it. I think Netflix doesn't need to tell a dishonest story. I think there's enough there, especially like this 2021 season. There's so much like. I hope they do more than 10 episodes, because there's way more than 10 episodes worth of content, clearly, that was gripping, insane, so many different storylines. They don't need to tell a dishonest story. I don't think that to make something that's really compelling. That's my kind of, I guess maybe in previous seasons where it was a bit more, there was, Lewis was head and toes ahead, but then they focused more on the midfield battles, which was still interesting. But I feel in 2021, they could tell a super honest story with no clips out of context. And I think it would still really appeal to a more wide kind of audience base, because it was just 2021 was just so mad.
It really was. And I feel like Drive to Survive, this is going to be such a crucial year for them, because season 1 and season 2, everybody adored it, thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And then season 3 came along, and all of a sudden, I'd be used to doing Drive to Survive pieces, and everyone in the comments would be like, yes, can't wait, so excited for it. And then after season 3, there was like such a change in the perception of it, and people being like, nah, I don't like it, it's too fake, it's too manufactured,
really?
All of this stuff. And so I hope, like you said, with season 4, I mean, they've got enough. Like, I know Verstappen isn't going to be doing, he's talking headbits to camera, but they've got enough with Lewis and Max to fill the 10 episodes alone. So I really hope that they can take the bits that they know fans want to see, like Ocon in Hungary, or I would love to see more about the relationship between Carlos and Charles last year. I think that would be absolutely fascinating. And not end up, following Nicholas Latifi at like the Spanish Grand Prix when nothing happens, like we need to get those big headlines and really utilize them, because they are special and they should be celebrated, and not instead trying to find really niche little storylines where they're not really there. So we'll see.
That's the thing. I guess it's kind of, they've got focus first and foremost in their mind of what they want to achieve, and it's what they want to. They don't want to achieve a season recap. It's about giving that additional insight into these drivers that I think super important. But at the same time, they need to throw more resource at it so that more teams are being covered each race. Because I know people say, "Oh, that it's not chronological," but if it was to if they wanted to cover everything, they'd have to have like 10 camera crews at all 10 teams for every single race, and they're not throwing that resource at it. So, but like you say, I'm super interested in these, what was Charles, because Charles and Carlos kept it together pretty well in 2021, considering how close they got. But there were a few little instances, like Saudi Arabia, where he was like, please let him part. Don't do this, Charles. I love that. That was such a good line. Like, there's going to be some friction there between any teammates at some stages, but I just wondered to what extent, because I think they both know that Ferrari have got I think Ferrari are going to be right up there next year, personally.
Oh yeah, I'd like to think so. I know. I also keep doing this like next year, this year. It's 2022. Come on. But yeah, I think that's going to be super interesting because I'll be honest. When Carlos got signed to Ferrari, I was like, no, they should have get Danny Ric in there with his Italian heritage. But I thought he was a better driver than Carlos at the time, and I was super surprised by that signing. But actually, Carlos has done the work. He's proved himself to be a phenomenal talent. Now he's, up against someone like Charles Leclerc, who, we talk about him as being Ferrari's golden boy. And he went into that season and he beat him. And I think, we all know drivers have got such big egos that is surely going to have ruffled some feathers on Charles' camp and his side of things. And, although they're very good at being composed when speaking to the media and, congratulations to my teammate, all that kind of stuff, that they're seriously pissed. As soon as those cameras are off, they get into their driver's briefing room and they're like, absolutely, why is he beating me? Like, this is not right. Something's wrong, blah, blah, blah.
They're competitors. This is what they do.
I'd love to be able to see that more. Yeah. And especially with Ferrari, like we've seen so many times how they don't like any kind of tensions or anything that's not part of their plan being broadcast to the media. They told Seb off for some certain things he was doing. It's got to be the Ferrari way or the highway. So I wonder how much Drive to Survive are going to be able to capture that, because I think that's going to be the one team where you really get a proper insight into how things are run, because Ferrari can't really, as far as I'm aware, they can't really control what Drive to Survive put out there. They just got to film what they film, and you can't get one of the Ferrari guys calling up and going, so Charles had that really messy rage and he punched through a door. Can you just cut that out? They're not going to do that, are they? They'll be like, no, sorry.
Oh no, those boom arms are right over all the time, capturing all these little insights. But no, it's a good point you make about Carlos, because you look through Carlos's career. He got Toro Rosso, he was kind of beaten by Verstappen. Went to Renault, was beaten by Hulkenberg, I'm pretty sure, I think. And then obviously goes against Lando and does beat Lando, but obviously Lando's a rookie, so there's always that caveat to how good is Lando. You only had Carlos Sainz to compare him to. There was always a kind of part of you, it was like, oh, maybe. And I think as well, him being a junior, where his dad's the Carlos Sainz name kind of, in motorsport comes from his father, absolute legend in rally. And it's there's always that position. Oh, maybe he's not the real deal. Maybe he's just there because of his dad. Maybe he's not proven himself. But then he just, it just showed what Lando did to Daniel this year, how good Lando is, and therefore how good Carlos has been. And he jumped in alongside Charles and just looked comfortable almost straight, especially considering how much Seb struggled in that same seat. But do you have any particular teams? They're not necessarily going to be the best team, but a team that you feel is really going to make the biggest step up relative? Because obviously Sauber haven't really achieved much. They've always been kind of sitting around 8th, 9th for the last, it feels 8, 9 years. Haas obviously started well, then dropped off. Do you have any thoughts around that at all?
I mean, if there's one team on the grid that has to improve this year, is Aston Martin, because my goodness, they came into 2021, all singing, all dancing. We're going to do amazing things, like their whole launch that they had with Daniel Craig and Tom Brady and Lawrence Stroll going proper James Bond villain vibes. And there was a lot of talk. And then they were able to walk the walk last year. And it was mega disappointing. I know they got 2 podiums, or 1 officially. But yeah, that was a pretty disappointing year for them, especially the hype they had with Racing Point, obviously towards the end of 2020, with the Sakir result and, a double podium for them. Everyone thought, this is it. They finally sort of made it. And that was massively disappointing for them last year. But I just have this feeling that it's still going to be kind of a Mercedes and Red Bull fight. I think Ferrari definitely will be in there with it. And, hopefully they'll be able to get a couple of victories this year to spice up the results table, which would be nice. But Yeah, I just feel like Mercedes have got such a strong package. I'm sure with all of this talk, if Hamilton will return, if he won't return, I think he'll be back. I can't imagine him bowing out the sport in that way. I think it would be a really unfortunate end to his incredible career. Yeah, I just feel like they've got such a good, strong competitive package. They know what they're doing in terms of, with the power units. And they've got such a good team around them at the factory. I think that they will be the ones that will take the Constructors' Championship. I'm saying all this, like we haven't even seen a car on track yet. We haven't even seen a car launch, so it could be anyone's game. But I'm a bit of a pessimist in the way that F1 are, saying 2022 is going to be completely new sheet of paper and anyone could challenge for the win. And it's like, in reality, Mercedes have got so much budget. I think Red Bull, obviously, they've lost their workings with Honda, although they're going to sort of tag along a bit and try and help them with that transition process. That could be seen as a bit of a disadvantage going into this year. But yeah, I think, if anything, I think Alfa will probably get worse and drop below Williams and maybe finish. I know they finished below Williams anyway in 2021, but you know what I mean? Like, they're going to just keep going lower and lower and lower.
It's weird with Alfa because Sauber's got like a really good facility. Like they've got this amazing wind tunnel. Like they're not short of resource, but it just hasn't been able to something's just not been able to click over recent years, which is a shame because I'd love to. I was thinking about like in 2008 where Honda finished 9th in the constructors, and then the Brawn won the title, which was the Honda. The year after, so it would be equivalent to Alfa Romeo winning the constructors title and the drivers championship in 2022, which would be one hell of a story. But talking of being pessimistic around the 2022 regs, have you seen Zach Brown's statement that he came out with earlier on, like today?
I've seen parts of it because it's like 2,000 words, and I was like,
2,800
I was off yesterday, and I was like,
and
Zach,
something.
I'm not reading this on my day off, mate. It's an essay.
But he goes in.
One day off.
He goes in on the which fair play to him. Like I think he's kind of talking a lot about how like the big teams are still trying to lobby for like, crash damage in sprint races, we need more money. But like, same rules for everyone, right? Surely.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, from memory, none of the big teams really had much crash damage in the sprint races anyway. I mean, Lewis dropped off, I think, in the first 2 out of 3. He was the person who dropped the most positions in the whole of the grid. But yeah, apart from Perez just absolutely having a nightmare in Silverstone and having that very close contact to the wall and then having to start the race last, I can't really think of many other big teams that kind of had a nightmare with sprint races. But yeah, it's I mean, go off Zach Brown if that's how you feel. It's important to get how you feeling out there, out in the open.
Exactly.
But over 2,000 words, that's a big old rant. I would be proud of that size rant on the WTF1.
It was almost 3K, which is like longer than most of my video scripts. So he went in, no question. I want to talk a little bit more about WTF1, but specifically, and the piece of work I know you had a big hand in, which was the WTF1 Annual.
Yes,
talk to me about it, Katie, and to anyone who doesn't know about the WTF1 Annual, because I think the age of print media isn't over. That's all I'll say.
No, I think, WTF1 is not going to suddenly launch a weekly magazine. That's not going to happen. Crikey, I've got enough on my plate. I don't need to do magazines as well.
Overtime.
Already working 24/7. I can't do anymore. But yeah, that was exciting. So one of my bosses said to me sort of in the summer last year, I've got this idea of doing an annual. And I was like, okay, I haven't had an annual since like 2005. I had my little Blue Peter annual, and I'm sure maybe you had like football annuals and stuff like that. But I was thinking, okay, this could be interesting. But yeah, as time went on, thinking of ideas, we have an amazing graphic designer, Ollie, who I worked with on the annual very closely, coming up with all these things. And it was like, okay, I think it was like 200 words for each race, which I was like, that'll be easy. That's literally nothing. I mean, Zach Brown's writing 3K just on a random Monday, I've got all this time to write these things, but my goodness, I tell you, trying to fit some of those races in 2021 into 200 words, it was like such a difficult task. I mean, with things like Baku, you're like, oh, well, it's okay because all the drama sort of happened in like the last 3 or 4 laps. But still, like trying to condense some of these races and like the introduction of sprint weekends, and it was all a lot. But yeah, we got it done. It was very stressful because I underestimated the task. I kind of left it a little bit to the last minute. So I was like, oh, it's going to be fine. Like the championship will be wrapped up and I won't have to worry. So I think I probably started it around the Qatar weekend. And then that was just mess, like in terms of how busy the race weekends were. So I was having to keep traffic up on WTF1, contribute to the podcast, and Tommy and I were doing like midweek podcasts and trying to do more stuff on social and help with that, and also writing this annual. But it got done, and we had a limited print run. So if you haven't got one now, I'm afraid you've missed out. There might be some on eBay in a couple months' time, but
resellers.
Exactly.
Get on StockX.
I'll sign a few copies and
why not? But I thought that was a really cool little like thing to put out, because obviously so much of essentially, I guess you can you treat it like a piece of merchandise, which obviously YouTubers are like known for doing merchandise, and typically that's clothing, but actually, and obviously WTF1 does do merchandise clothing, but like that can exist in so many different forms. And I think having an annual is like a really nice thing to I remember when I first saw it, I was like, that's a decent little idea. I might have to steal that. Yeah. No, I don't know how to do a WTF1 annual. Just pictures of my face from each month. Progressively more depressed that Alex isn't racing in 2021. But he's back. Okay. And today, did you see?
It's very exciting.
They posted today his first day. I was like, yeah, it's my birthday. Of course it's that day. Bless him.
I saw you. I watched the stream you did before this, and when you were like, you could have at least like ironed the back of his jumper. It's all creased.
I know. The steamer doesn't cost much. Come on, like
no.
I've got a steamer. It costs like 30 quid. Easy. Bosh,
I'm coming, Alex.
Alex.
Wait up.
I'm looking forward to him being back next year. Though it'll be nice. It'll be nice for me on a kind of personal level, because this year I don't know, because obviously you're. In terms of the drivers that you're most kind of affiliated on a personal level, which again, Tommy's got Max and Yuki, and Matt's got Charles, and going into next year, are there particular drivers that you, on a kind of personal level, are going to be like, yeah, I'm rooting for you?
I guess so. I mean, I have always been a big fan of Danny Rick. I don't think there are many people out there that aren't a fan of Daniel Ricciardo. But yeah, he had, I'd like to think he'd say this himself, like a pretty shocking 2021. Obviously, it's mad to say he had a bad year when he got a win in Monza. But generally, it was like he was a different person almost. He's still able to keep that character of being, like we said earlier, this fun-loving guy and stuff. But you could tell, like, being away from home, I think, had a huge part of it. Yeah. And I guess it's a bit of a kick to the nuts to go into a team when you've got a younger teammate who's only been in F1 a couple of years, and you're not able to get familiar with that car because he's so used to... when he was at Red Bull, obviously he had a great package underneath him there, but going to Renault, he kind of knew that things might take time. And he was, when he signed for Renault, he was told, you're going to have to maybe play the long game a little bit here, but we're going to be winning championships down the line. And then he kind of jumped ship as soon as they started to get competitive, which obviously Cyril has said he wasn't very happy about. And then he got the sack, so... See you later, Cyril.
Yikes.
But yeah, I think going into McLaren, he probably thought, I'll slot right in here and I'll be in competitive machinery and I'll be able to be back to my ways of how I was in Red Bull. And the reality was he was actually completely the opposite, and he was having an absolute nightmare most weekends. So yeah, I'd like to see him do well in 2022. Like I said, I just love Esteban Ocon. I just think he's the most wholesome little chap. He's so sweet. But yeah, just generally, I'm a big supporter of anyone who's been through some tough times can come out the other side stronger. You know, people like Sergio Perez, I'm a big fan of, and I'm glad that he's finally, he seems to have found himself in a good place with that Red Bull, which is great to see. I guess Russell is going to be an interesting one as well, going to that top team. He's seemed at Williams to be, you know, such a nice, like, well-rounded gentleman of sorts. And when we saw that glimpse of that team radio in Imola when he came together with Valtteri and the colourful language he was using, you know, sounding like a roadman, I was like, oh my God, I want to see this George Russell. This is fascinating. I love it.
Even in like an Armani tracksuit walking around King's Lynn. You can imagine back in the day. This is an alternative George Russell that never went down the motorsport route. I completely, like, actually, and a lot of people will be like, I really want to see Sebastian Vettel back up the top winning races because I just love that career. You know, he was amazing, and then he had this real tough patch, and you know, I feel like we've seen enough from the fact that he put that Aston Martin, which probably 7th quickest car of the season, on the podium twice. Yeah, technically, kind of, but not. Like that is huge. And yes, his poor performances were pretty poor, but his peaks, there was enough there to showcase, to me anyway, that he's got the minerals. But on to Daniel Ricciardo as well, because I feel like when he joined Renault that first season, especially the first half of that first season, I do think he struggled. Like he struggled to get up to speed relative to Hülkenberg at the time. But then his second year, quality, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm hopeful for Daniel in 22. I really do think he's going to be at a level. And obviously, how much do you think as well, like, it's new cars for everyone in 22. Do you think that helps drivers like Albon jumping in? You know, all of these youngsters that haven't had the experience of their counterparts. Do you think that really helps them, or do you think that the experience of drivers like Seb, drivers like Lewis, drivers like, you know, someone like Max as well, like got tons of experience now, do you think that will help because they've got more experience in racing? Like, what way do you think that will go? I
think, if anything, it's probably going to hinder the people that are going to be coming back, like Albon or, you know, Guan Yu Zhou or whoever, because there's certain drivers on that grid which, you know, they can build a winning team around them. I think there's a difference between just being a very good driver, you know, knowing how to drive fast, having that skill, and, you know, that's very valuable to a team. But there are certain drivers like Vettel, like Hamilton, like Max, who can shape not just a car around them, but a team around them. And I think that, you know, although these new cars are coming in for 2022, drivers like that, of that ability, I think will just know what they want, and they'll have hopefully a good team around them that are, you know, used to working with those drivers that know exactly how they want this positioned or how they want that set up. And, you know, they're going to be able to trial some stuff in the simulator, say, I like this, I don't like this. It's not going to be a case of everyone just rocks up in Bahrain and gets plonked in the same seat. And it's going to be a case of learning throughout the season. Like, they're going to know what they want. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. But I just hope that it's not going to be as disastrous as, well, maybe disastrous is a bit harsh, but for Albon coming in this year, because, you know, I was critical of him towards the end of his time with Red Bull. I think he himself knew that he wasn't going to get that seat renewal. And, you know, I got criticised quite a lot on social media for, I'm trying to think where it was. Which race would it have been? It was at night. Maybe it was, where was it where he had that big crash in maybe like one of the free practice sessions?
That was,
towards the end of the season?
It was Bahrain / Sakir, where it was on the final corner, wasn't it? Where, you know, where Jack Aitken had his little incident as well.
Yeah. I'm so used to Bahrain being at the start of the calendar now. I'm like, it can't have been Bahrain. But yeah, like his body language and the way he spoke about things after that incident, and I was like, oh, like, that's not the way he should be. He kind of was just like, well, you know, it is what it is. And I put that on on Twitter and was like, to me, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but that's the kind of body language that he's kind of given up.
A man defeated.
And all the album fans were like, oh, you're so horrible. Not you necessarily, but other album fans. And I was like, no, I'm just saying. I think
I said something very similar. Like, it didn't exactly inspire confidence the way that but again, look, that's the thing as well. Like, you look at the context of that Red Bull second seat, and you had Pierre, who jumped in after a year and a little bit at Toro Rosso, so he was only really in his second season when he jumped into that Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen, and obviously Max is that good that they gave him a seat when he was 18
out of the womb.
Pretty much. And it's like, and you look at how obviously Alex jumped into that Red Bull still in his rookie season, did a pretty good job. And then 2020 was just, there's all this increased pressure and there's all this kind of expectation going in where he was given the seat instead of Gasly and Kvyat as well. Because obviously I remember when Alex got that call up, a lot of people thought Kvyat should have instead. And by the end of the year, he definitely... Confidence is a huge part. Like, I think a huge part of why Daniel Ricciardo did so well at COTA this in 2021 was because he loves Texas. Like, literally.
Yeah.
I know that sounds mad, but he's considering, like you say, he's not been back to Perth for so long. Like, he loves LA, he loves, Texas, he loves that part of the States. Like, I think these are human beings at the end of the day. It's very easy to forget that and just think they're these like F1 player cards with a rating and like numbers for each. But actually, they're people. That's gonna change all the time. And I think confidence and why Sergio did so well at Sakir in 2020. Because he was driving with a point to prove, and I think that can make the difference.
Oh, hugely. I think it's. There's plenty of examples of where Bottas, for example, lost that Mercedes seat. Probably knew it was coming in Zandvoort, and set that cheeky fastest lap, which was very entertaining. And I hope that also gets covered in Drive to Survive.
He was just having fun. He didn't do it on
purpose, but
he was just having fun, some fun.
He knew what he was doing. But, and after it was announced that he'd be leaving Mercedes, joining Alpha, he was putting in some phenomenal performances. Like, his performance around Monza, for me, was one of the best of the whole season. And yet it gets, I think, really overlooked. But not just, put it on unofficial pole. I still hate these rules, but went quickest on the Friday and then won the sprint race and then had this engine penalty, but still came from like pretty much the back to the podium. I know Max and Lewis did him a favour of sorts by taking each other out, but still like an amazing performance from him. And
couldn't ask more for him that weekend, could you? I did everything.
No, not at all. And I do think that was a big 2 fingers up to Mercedes, which I'm all for. Well, not all for like sticking 2 fingers up to Mercedes, but
who it may concern.
Yeah, literally.
One of them.
I think it's quite funny.
That's what I mean, and they're the story arcs. Again, look, I'd love to see Valtteri do well in an Alfa Romeo because I feel like his kind of he talked, didn't he, about like the whole not getting a contract extension and how that affected him. Again, like some drivers would thrive off of that, that insecurity around your status at a team. And others won't because everyone's like, to be a manager, you have to understand, how to get the best out of your people. And I'd argue maybe, Toto didn't do that, but then maybe he didn't want to do that because he wanted Valtteri to be that, clear second fiddle to Lewis. Maybe that was choreographed. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It would make sense, wouldn't it? Because Toto was quite, he was quite vocal. I remember there was an article, I'm sure you would have seen it, where he said like if he would never have chosen Nico and Lewis to be racing together, but that was already agreed before he joined, right? He loves a harmonious relationship. And Lewis said Valtteri was the best teammate he ever had, which I'm sure Nico and Jensen felt a bit about. Bless him.
I mean, if he came out and said it was Fernando Alonso, then I think I would literally fall off my chair because that would be incredible.
That would be too good. That would be
Poor
too much.
Kovalainen gets completely overshadowed every time. But
isn't he like meant to be the 8th quickest of all time or something according to that AWS thing?
I don't know who made this list, but yeah, apparently so.
Jeff Bezos knows wheel apparently. But Katie, I want to go back briefly now because obviously, you're in this position, editor WTF1. incredible job. Like, you should be incredibly proud of yourself to get to where you are now, especially considering you took it from a hobby to this position you're in. And I'm sure there's a lot of people, you know, listening and watching who have ambitions to work in motorsport in some kind of editorial journalistic form. And you know, do it as a passion project, whether they, you know, write on Twitter, whether they have their blog on their own website, make YouTube videos, whatever it may be. What would you kind of, if you could speak to Katy 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, like, what advice, what do you think were the main kind of components that made you stand out enough for you're the person who works at WTF1, you're the person with this opportunity. What do you think you did that made you, because when WTF1 posts a job, you're going to get a lot of applications. I'm just going to say that. And you were the one who stood out. So what do you think made you stand out?
That is a great question. I mean,
that's what I do.
Yeah. So my career path, you know, you had Luke Smith on the Cool Down podcast, and his is very different route into Formula One than mine. He went to university and did all that, whereas I did my A levels, did my first year, which is like the levels of school before university for people that aren't in the UK, and it's a 2-year, I guess, you know, of school that you do. And I failed my first year. And that was like massively soul destroying, because it's not like I didn't work hard. Like, I worked my ass off. And I originally was doing these subjects because I wanted to go to university to be a teacher. And I don't know, maybe it's just I don't do well in exam conditions like coursework, anything like that, where I can research it and put all my effort and energy into one end piece. I excel at, I do really well at, which I think is one of the reasons why, you know, I find so much enjoyment in all my writing, because it's similar to kind of coursework at school. But yeah, exam conditions I suck at really bad. So I then, in that summer break, was looking for things to do, get over the misery of that I'm either going to have to go back and redo my first year or carry on with my second year, but work twice as hard to try and balance out my grades so that they were okay enough to go to university. And yeah, in that summer holidays, I thought, I'm bored, what can I do? So I made my own blog, which was just a, you know, side project. I think I called it like Formula Fairman, which is so embarrassing.
Bit of alliteration there, like that.
Yeah. But I put all my time and energy in the summer break into that and really enjoyed it, so that when it came to making that decision to start again or to do my second year, I decided to start again. So went back a year, which, as someone who'd always done quite well in school, I was like, this is a bit of a strange position to be in, but you know, when life gives you lemons. So I decided to change the subjects that I was going to do and instead focus them more on relating to kind of journalism and English and all that kind of stuff. So doing media studies instead of geography, for example, things that are much more creative, and did all that. And ended up, after completing my 2 years of A levels, was like, the last thing I want to do is more school and go to university. It's really not what I need right now. I've got my blog. It's getting, you know, traction. People are reading it. Unfortunately, the sixth form that I was at was so unsupportive, basically saying to me when I said, I want to go into F1 and motorsport journalism. And they were like, well, if you don't go to university, you're never going to make it anywhere in life. Giving me examples of, you know, their friends who were like, you know, well, I've got a friend who's been a director at a theatre for 30 years and she can't get any kind of promotions because she didn't go to university, and all this kind of unrelated stuff. And I was like, okay, but that's your friend. I'm different. I know that you can get into F1 through all sorts of routes. So I'm going to stick to what I think I should do. And although my school were not happy with the fact that I didn't want to go to university, you know, I think they just wanted it for purely selfish reasons. So they could say, you know, 95% of our students went to university.
100%.
Yeah.
I've heard that so many times. It does my head in. And that's so sad that you had to go through that, mate. That's terrible.
And I got so emotional. I got to the point where they were literally, it was the final day of UCAS applications, so putting forward what you want to do for uni, and I had a teacher stood over my shoulder watching me fill in this form on the last day. They even gave me their credit card details, because there's a fee to put it in, because they were so keen for me to put forward to go to university. And I was literally it's like a hostage situation. I'm sat there crying, being like, I don't want to do it. And
what? That's
sent it
insane.
off. I know, it is ridiculous. And went in the next day and was like, I've cancelled it. I'm not giving you your money back. I'm not going to university. I didn't ever rule it out. I was like, I could do it in a few years' time, but right now for me, it's a no. And then actually kind of similar, because I was re-listening back to Luke Smith's episode the other day of how he said, he had a teacher that didn't quite believe he'd do it. And then he got the gig with NBC and could go in and be like, well, actually, I'm going to be going there as a journalist and I'm not going just to sit in the grandstands, like that mic drop moment. That summer, I managed to get my work in The Independent, The Times, some stuff on BBC. And I took the newspaper clippings in, put them on the desk and was like, I don't need university. Like, I'm going to do this on my own. Like, screw you, basically. To who it may concern, as Valtteri Bottas once said.
To whom it may concern.
Yeah. So
I
was
love
like,
that.
Don't need you. And then the cheeky, can I swear on this?
Go for it, mate.
I was going to say the cheeky bastards. I won't be too clever language, but they then were like, oh, this is amazing. Can we put you in our student alumni album and call upon you if we need you to do any talks to the students? I was like, no, I never want to speak to you ever again. Like, get out of my life. So,
wow.
I know.
Pathetic. What a bunch of begs.
Exactly.
Oh, Katie, you've done well, please.
They genuinely said, do you know Lewis Hamilton? Do you think that you could get him to wear a T-shirt with our sixth form logo on it? I was like, oh my God.
What? Who are these? Where did you go to? This place needs to be shut down, Katie. I'm sorry. This is horrible. What is this? This is mad. That's disgusting, man. Like your job as an educator isn't just to pass on information, but it's to help these youngsters around you, whether it's primary, secondary, college. That's do you, when you reflect on that, because obviously that's some the hit of failing first year, that must have big dent on your confidence there. You've gone through all of these other things. Like, how do you reflect on that adversity? Failures are inevitable. And adversity is inevitable. It's how you respond to that that's important, right? Do you actually look back on that and think, actually, if it wasn't for all that, maybe I wouldn't be where I wanted to be?
Definitely. I mean, so that would have probably been 2015. So I'd had my blog 2 years by that point. And as mad as the whole school being completely not understanding at all, there was even more to that year, which has definitely been the biggest thing that I've overcome. And I look back at it now and I'm really proud of how I dealt with the situation, because it was terrifying at the time. And although I won't go into naming names or anything like that, but there was a certain individual who wanted to invite young aspiring journalists into the F1 paddock to help with jobs that they needed doing. And this person reached out to me and was like, I've seen the stuff you do with your blog and we have some mutual connections. And I got invited out first to the 2015 Monaco E-Prix with Formula E, which was, first time I'd ever been to a proper race. And I was in Monaco and I got put up in this 5-star hotel where all the drivers were. And I was like, this is the most amazing thing ever. Got to go to these gala dinners, and I'd been 2 years into creating this blog, and I was still at school at this point, and I had all of school being against me, saying I'm not going to make it if I don't go to uni. And I thought, well, I've done this now, so this is pretty amazing. And then in the summer, I got invited out to the Hungarian Grand Prix and the Belgian Grand Prix by the same individual, this time with a different person. On both occasions, I went out with another young woman who was, aspiring in motorsport. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it, because I was like, this person's just trying to help out. I've heard so much advice of, people, there are going to be nice people in the industry and there are going to be nasty people, and the nice people will make sure that you're taken care of and give you advice. And I was, I guess, vulnerable and at the time thought that this person was just a genuinely good egg. And then when I was at races and events with them, they spoke to me in a very condescending and just not very pleasant manner. They were very demanding, very snappy, and their just general behaviour, I wasn't on my wavelength. I was like, this is quite off. And yeah, they ended up being one instance where this individual spoke to me in one of the motorhomes in such a foul, horrible manner that I had enough. I stood up to them and said, like, I don't like the way you're speaking to me. If this is going to continue, like, I'm done. I'm not helping you anymore. And it soured the whole rest of the trip. Bearing in mind, this was in Spa, like the most magical circuit you could imagine. I was in the F1 paddock. I'd been doing, my motorsport blog for 24 months, and I'd made it into the F1 paddock in that time. And I thought that the stars had aligned and this was going to be my future. And then to have that all come crumbling down because I was not going to let myself be spoken to in such a nasty way. Like, I still think that was 100% the right thing to do, because I didn't want to just be a doormat. And if I was going to make it, I was going to do it in my way. And this person was very well established in the paddock and essentially said, okay, well, I'm going to make it pretty much my life goal that you never work in F1 again. And I was like, okay, that's concerning, because I must have been about 18 at this point. And like I said, I've been doing it for such a short amount of time. And I thought, it's over already, just because I didn't like being spoken to like absolute trash. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of made the move over to Formula E, is because I didn't want much to do with Formula One at that point in time, because I knew they were still working in there, and I had visions that I said earlier, I'm a massive overthinker. I had this vision that this person had gone around telling every team and every PR, blacklist this name, make sure they never come into the F1 paddock and all this kind of stuff. And it was terrifying as like a young, inexperienced, woman, not sure that I would ever be able to make a return to the F1 paddock again. And so, yeah, I went and did my thing in Formula E, and realised that there are those nice people out there, and made, friends for life. And I know Formula E isn't everybody's cup of tea. Like, I completely admit that. There are things about Formula E that I love. There are things about Formula E that I really don't agree with, and I don't like how they handle certain situations. But I sort of separated myself from the F1 world and focused in on being in a lovely paddock, an FIA paddock, so I could get familiar with how things were run professionally, and going to press conferences and getting my confidence up, speaking to drivers one-on-one or asking questions in press conferences, and just generally developing my skills. Because like I said, I didn't go to uni. I didn't have an understanding of how any of this kind of worked. I just kind of did my stuff in Formula E, learned on the job, made mistakes. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I went into like a media pen with a driver and I literally had a mind blank mid-conversation. The driver's looking at me like, what is this crazy woman trying to say? And I'm just there like, but I've, it's all shaped me. And now I carried on doing all the stuff with my blog, which is what I used when I was in Formula E. And through keeping true to myself and making sure my blog had my personality behind it. I spoke earlier about BBC and how some of their stuff is informative, but it's quite dry.
Yep.
I made sure that I didn't lose that tone of voice when I wrote my opinionated pieces or things like that. And I think in the end, that's what stood out to Tommy. Obviously founder of WTF1. I'll get sacked if I don't say that.
I know it's in the contract.
He said, yeah, it's the first thing. But yeah, he had seen this way that I write and he really liked it and thought that it would be a good fit for WTF1. And that's kind of how that relationship started. But yeah, it's definitely like looking back at it now, like I said earlier, I'm glad with how I handled the whole situation. And there are other women in this industry who I know went through very, very similar things with the same person and had outcomes where they're not even working in motorsport anymore. They've been so scarred by it. And it's unfortunate that there are these stories happening, you know, as recently as, 2015. Fortunately, this person doesn't work in the paddock anymore. They're long gone. But yeah, like that was terrifying as someone who was just starting out, to be told by this quite senior authoritative figure that I would never be allowed in F1 again. And now I'm at WTF1 and I'm doing a good job. And, you know, what the motto of it is don't give up, as cliche as it is, because if you work hard and you're good at what you do, I have faith that you'll get there.
Mate, that's I mean that's
it's a lot. Sorry to drop that little
no
it's like
no
a nice
like that's
chatty fun thing, and then I'm
no
like,
that's exactly what I want from this, because it's real, you know what I mean? Like your experiences, it, you know, that there is this kind of perception that, you know, people who get to these, you know, positions where, you know, you have this amazing job and you've got this, you know, and it's like, oh yeah, and it's kind of, you know, you don't see the troughs, you see the successes, and you've got to this amazing position, but also acknowledging and acknowledging those kind of times where things felt like they were all against you, because of course, we got someone in a position of power, and there is a lot, you know, spoken of over the years of, you know, it is a very kind of white male dominated sport, and how people will use that to their kind of seeming advantage in some way to manipulate and coerce people. It's disgusting that you had to go through that. Even going back to, you know, your college stuff, you know, a lot of other, you know, it must have taken a lot from you to have that belief. And I know you talked about kind of imposter syndrome, but for you to still push through and pass that, because I see a lot of people, you know, they'll be working in these kind of, I think the traditional kind of schooling system, for one thing, that kind of punishes creativity, that punishes kind of entrepreneurship and those kind of tendencies, and you're rewarded, you know, you get A grades because you're good at math, but you don't get A grade because you're good at you know what I mean? Like, it punishes certain things. And then going into that, I mean, that I've had obviously plenty of females on the podcast, people of color, and obviously it's a subject that we will inevitably get onto, because there is such a discrepancy in motorsport, not just in F1, in motorsport, of representation. You know, if we are all as fair as people on the other side, like say, oh well, you know, the best person for the job should get it. Well, why is it 99% male then? Like, why is it 99%? Why, like surely, if that was true, then it would be a fair representation of society. And obviously, in your position, you know, you've gone through all of these trials and tribulations, but you are here where you are now, and you're going to be, you know, inspiring the next generation of young women who, you know, want to write about motorsport and want to be into, because that's the thing as well. Like, you love motorsport. That was your hobby, and that was something like, even when you were growing up, did you experience pressure to be like, what? Because it's not considered it's considered a male sport, isn't it? That's the way it's perceived.
Oh, definitely. Like, I mean, from my the home that I grew up in, like, my dad loved F1. He then got my mum into it, and then they, you know, it was always on a Sunday because they both enjoyed it. So me and my brother also got into it. But yeah, like, even within home, you know, if my dad got a chance to go to Goodwood, for example, like for the Festival of Speed, his first port of call would always be to take my brother, because I think for a long time he didn't consider my enjoyment of Formula One to be serious. Yeah. Not to say that he's a terrible father or anything like that. He just, I think maybe was just thinking, oh, my son, you know, he'll be like me, he'll have the same passions. Yeah. And then it kind of twisted on its head. Like, my brother still absolutely adores Formula One. He's a huge Fernando Alonso fan, which was quite amusing when we had these clash of opinions at the start of 2021. But, you know, it was then me saying to my dad, oh, I've got us tickets to go to this, or let's go. Like, I took him to the filming of Top Gear, which he's always wanted to do, which was a fun day, like, nice time to spend with him. And I'm now the one being like, I've got us tickets for Goodwood, rather than him being like, I've got a ticket and I'm going to take your brother. Like, it's me putting these things forward, which is cool. But yeah, like in school, and like none of my friends like Formula One. You know, occasionally I'd take like a copy of Autosport magazine into my school to like read on the breaks or whatever. And yeah, all of my friends, and this is going to make my friends sound really shallow, so I'm just sorry in advance, but like I take the magazine and then they'd be like, oh, he's really hot, I like him. Oh, and I'm like, yeah, that's Lewis Hamilton, he's a like, and going on this like massive stat facts, and they're like, okay, but he's quite cute. And I'm like, I mean, I don't look at him like that, but he's a good
He's a handsome bloke. He's a handsome bloke, though. You got that.
You can admit, most of the drivers on the grid are, attractive people. But yeah, it was very interesting. So like pretty much all my motorsport friends were male. And, like I said earlier, I'm super lucky through Formula E and through other things that I've met a really good group of men and women now who maybe with similar age groups, and we can have these conversations, and being part of WTF1 as well is like I've been able to have so many chats with fans that maybe send me DMs on Instagram or through Twitter or through Instagram lives or something like that. And yeah, it's nice to go from sometimes feeling quite alone and quite isolated in like wanting to talk about F1 outside of in my house, to now having such a huge amount of people that are wanting to listen and interact. It's really one of the best things that has happened since joining WTF1 for sure.
Yeah, because that is, you go particularly in like primary, but particularly like secondary school as well. Like anything you do that makes you stand out is typically not like, it doesn't go well. Like you get like I used to play football, so that got me a lot of passes. But actually, I was a bit of a like, I liked my Yu-Gi-Oh, I liked RuneScape. I had my but and that would typically kind of there was other people I know who get picked on, but I'd kind of get a pass because I was part of the football team. But it's like, I think the reason I think it's important to talk about this is because the work that Lewis has done towards like the Hamilton Commission, increasing diversity and representation, and the counter argument is always, oh, people should be there based on merit and nothing else. And I understand where that comes from, but I think what that fails to acknowledge is that, again, you as a female, when you're at school, you would have, you had all your mates who were into certain things. You would have, felt pressure to not do. I equate it to like, if I was, when I was a kid, if I really wanted to be a ballerina, that's the best way I feel like I can try and contextualize it. Because it's like, of course, like my parents would have been like, well, why are you doing that? Why aren't you doing the more? Because, that, like, you can say that's wrong, but also you've got to bear in mind that they would know that, if I'm into ballet as a male boy at school, I'm going to get picked on for it by like the bullies. Like that's going to happen. And there's all these pressures that stop. And, when Lewis was coming through karting, I'm sure you've seen the clips of him when he was a kid talking about, him getting racist abuse. And just like having, and he's like an 8-year-old, like he's like 10, 11. He's talking about it as if it's like just a daily thing. And it's like, there's all these factors that stop so many, whether it's again, people of color or females or people with any kind of minority from getting to that place where they can be picked on merit, because there's such a smaller talent. There's such a smaller pool of people compared to all of the white male kids mainly in motorsport. I just think that's the reality of it,
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm, I guess, lucky in the sense that I've never really, considered myself to be like, oh, I'm a girl who likes F1. Like, I'm just a person who enjoys the sport, the championship. And that's the same, for all the work that I've done. Like, I get questions quite a lot of like, what's it like being a woman in motorsport? And it's like, well, I'm sure it's just like I go into it with the same mindset that a man would have. I don't walk down the paddock looking for drivers thinking, I'm a woman. Like I'm going down there going, I need to find this driver because I want to ask them about their stupid driving in that race that just happened, took out 2 cars or whatever. I'm not going around and, thinking that like I'm just there to do my job. But yeah, I guess there have been some hurdles that I've had to encounter as a result of being a woman. But I know it's a bit like blasé to say like, oh, well, it just helped shape me into the person that I am. But that's very much just the opinion that I have. Not that I'm saying, you should have to go through these things to build character, because, if, I would hate for another young female who wanted to get into F1 to have to go through the same experiences as I did. I know there are millions of people that have had it way, way harder than I am. I'm not trying to, sell you a sob story here, because it's probably very minor experiences compared to what others have faced. But at the same time, there have been a lot of hoops to jump through. And it's quite sad that there are going to be plenty of other people that have had similar stories, and those that haven't been able to bounce back from them because they have been, significantly worse, and they've thought, what, that's that chapter closed, and we never got to see their full potential, whether that's in Formula One or sort of any area of a possible career path. So, yeah, it's a funny one, but. I feel like I've just given you the most long-winded answers to your questions. This is payback for all the time I've had to sit there with a dictaphone listening to drivers waffle. Yeah, okay, hon, wrap it up.
But no, I just think that, there's so many, and I think that's what Lewis has done really well in the Hamilton Commission. It's unpacking these very nuanced and complex subjects in a very kind of real way. And there's this kind of, with social media and attention spans, and all, there's this desperation for the answers. People want the answers to be simple and short and sweet and easy, and that's just not the reality of the situation. And like the use of the word like privilege, privilege itself is a very, very charged word, and it's like, but there's so many different kinds. If you're born and your parents are willing to sacrifice their weekends to take you to go-karting and have the money, that's a privilege that, like, I didn't have. I would have loved to be a racing driver. There was nothing more when I was a kid growing up to want to be a racing driver, but we didn't have the funds. We didn't live close enough to a go-karting track. And so, that wasn't the case. But you know what I mean? I think you can acknowledge these things, and I think that's what Lewis is doing is so important long term, because by the time this has come out, I will have put my video out talking about if Lewis set up his own Formula One team.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that'd be a banging idea.
Yeah.
Because, carrying on the story, obviously, he's done so much, and I think his voice won't be as strong when he's out of the sport, because, of course, when he's a presence in the sport, he can speak about things kind of at the source. But how do you see his kind of legacy panning out over the years beyond his retirement? Do you think he'd stay close to the sport, or do you think, because he has got a lot of other, he's got his what's the word, he's got his fingers in a lot of pies, is that it?
I think yeah, that's the phrase. I'm so bad at coming up with like wrong phrases. It's embarrassing. I think having anyone on the podcast every week. It's so bad to make them up. But yeah, I'd like to think that he would stick to spending time in Formula One. Like you say, he's got his music, he's got his fashion, he's got burger chain, he's got Extreme E and the Hamilton Commission. Like, the guy, he's a busy guy. And I love the fact that he has been able to find passion outside of Formula One. Like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, like my realization at the end of 2021 was that I just spent the whole year F1 focused, and that was it. Like, I rarely made time to see my friends. And, I have no other real passions outside of Formula One, which is something I'm trying to change this year. But for Lewis, like, I think that's excellent, and that's so healthy to have other projects that, he can just switch off from racing and focus on dropping a banger of a track if he wants to. Like, he can do that if he needs to. But yeah, I really hope that he doesn't take like a full step back. He doesn't do like a Kimi, for example. I don't think we might see Kimi maybe on an odd chance of dropping in if, he can be bothered. Maybe, stumble out of his yacht in Monaco for maybe one of the Monaco Grand Prix in a few years' time or something like that. But, he's not going to be like a Nico Rosberg or a Martin Brundle and doing blimmin' grid walks. Imagine Kimi trying to do Brundle's job. He's just going to be like, I can't be bothered to talk to these people. Move on. Yeah, I'd like to think that he would still have some relationship with Formula One. Abu Dhabi, elephant in the room, but I'm sure that has inevitably soured the fondness that he might have had, a year ago, 2 years ago with Formula One, because that's inevitably gonna have dented, that love and that passion for it. I'm sure he'll come back this year, absolutely, raring to go, willing to prove people wrong as he has done for his whole entire career. But yeah, I mean, creating an F1 team would be a very, very cool thing. We've seen it with Extreme, and although that's something that he's done to kind of show that he is passionate and he's caring about the environment and wanting to raise attention and put his name to that, which I think is awesome. Yeah, I think it could well be possible. I mean, we saw it with people like Prost, didn't we? He got his own team going, and it could well be something that he does. But maybe he's also going to have, I'm literally sitting so hard on this fence, but he then also could decide to bow out of Formula One, and that's that chapter over. I could also see that happening. So to give you an answer, Tomo, I don't really know. I think
that's the long-winded I don't know. Things will
always change. Things will always change, I guess, won't they?
Of course. But that and that's the thing as well. Like, all these drivers, they're people. And they have different interests and different passions, and Kimi's going to live his life with his family, chilling. I can't really see, he's got his kind of West Coast Choppers kind of like collaboration thing that he kind of does on the side. But, Valtteri Bottas has got like part ownership of an ice hockey team. You've got so many different drivers have these different endeavors, because it isn't just, they're not just F1. You kind of, like you were saying, you want to do more stuff outside of F1 this year, and when you work in F1 you do get kind of pigeonholed, whether you're a driver, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a YouTuber talking about it kind of. But there is so much more facets to these people, and I do think I'm super interested to see what Lewis does, because I feel like I couldn't see him on commentary. Definitely not. I don't think that's not going to happen. I don't think he'll work with F1 media. Hell no. But he clearly, he loves racing. He wants to have this impact, and he knows he's got this huge platform, and I think he can drive real change, within the sport, but also afterwards. He would get sponsors left, right, and centre, would be clambering over themselves to put themselves on that car. So he wouldn't even need to pay for it out of his own pocket. It's Nick Toto Wolff, James Allison, Bono. Come on, you're coming with me. Hamilton Racing, bosh, job done. That's the way. You could see it happening. I think so. Bruce McLaren didn't have the most. He was a very good racing driver. Didn't win world titles. But his name will forever be set in stone. I think that's my long shout. But Katie, we're gonna wrap it, mate. It's been just over an hour and a half. It's been a fantastic chat. I knew it would be a banger, and it's actually. I think this has been in terms of value, because I think it's super. I know how many people want to work in this industry, and I know how many people kind of, feel like it's probably not possible. You've been through your adversities. You've come out of it amazingly. You do an amazing job. Thank you so much for coming. Have you enjoyed having a chat with me?
I should have just turned around on your birthday and was like, nah, it's been a waste of 2 hours. No, I've loved it. Thank you very much for having me. It's been, as I was saying to you before we started recording, I've been such a big fan of you and your channel for such a long time. I still remember when you followed me back on Twitter, and I was like, oh my God, Tomo's coming back. I was so excited about that. But yeah, very honoured to be featured on the Cool Down podcast, and I hope that people have found what I've said to be interesting, and yeah, just proof that you don't have to go to university and know millions of people in the sport to make it. Fake it till you make it, baby.
We're all doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all faking it till we make it.
My DMs and email and everything like that is always open for anyone that has any questions or wants to chat through things. Then send me an email.
No,
don't
I'll
check
vouch
my
for
emails
that.
during the race.
No, I'll vouch for that, Katie. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll link to all of Katie's, whatever you want me to link to, I'll link in the description so that you can go and say hello and give her a follow. I don't have an outro. We are done.
Bye. Am I meant to say bye?
I wanted to see your reaction. I wanted to see what you'd do, and that was perfect. That was literally exactly what I wanted. Bye.